Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Kap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 60 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we have you prevail through Week 18, the final week of the fantasy football season. For you crazies out there that are playing in your fantasy football leagues, we're happy to do the show for you guys, but we do not condone Week 18 fantasy football leagues. You guys are ridiculous.
I agree.
There we go.
I agree. All your commissioners out there that allow that to happen, shame on you. Shame. And those people that do those 2-week playoffs, even more nonsense from them. Although I'm going to be honest, I'm starting to think Week 17 football is a little bit of a scam after.
Week 17 was a little wonky this year. I don't think it was as wonky last year. I don't think Week 18 was as wonky last year. I don't remember this many players and teams having everything lined up last year. I don't think the Chiefs had they didn't even get the 1 seed last year, but I think the 1 seed was up for grabs last year. I think there's a lot of players that played last year, and there's a lot of teams that are going to take the Chiefs are taking 2.5 weeks off, Nick. They're taking almost 3 weeks of football off. That's a lot of time. That is
It's not the first time. We've seen that before, but usually you should play the half out, I feel like.
This is longer because the Chiefs played on Christmas Day.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
This is going to be the Chiefs are not going to play football for, I think it's 24 days. At least Patrick Mahomes. We don't know how many Chiefs are going to play this weekend, but Patrick Mahomes is not. So,
yep.
With that said, this is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Kap. Nick, we decided to only do one show this week. There was no need to do a waiver wire for Week 18. If you wanted one, you could have tweeted us or something. You didn't tweet us, so you did not want or need a waiver wire for Week 18. And we didn't want to record a show on a Monday night before a big Monday Night Football game that probably did determine fantasy football matchups. But I am happy to announce to our viewers that me and Nick are champions for the 2024 fantasy football season.
Yes, we are. I was lucky enough to repeat in the league, so I'm trying to three-peat next year. Been in the league for, I believe this was my 4th year, so pretty fun to take home the trophy 2 out of 4 years in the league.
We love the sound of that. I won my Dynasty League that I made a lot of trades for that I spoke to you guys about a couple of weeks ago, right before that trade deadline. And the trade that scared me the most was trading Josh Jacobs for T. Higgins. And I think I raised my hand in the show and said, I don't know who could have traded Josh Jacobs. So you know what? This guy traded Josh Jacobs because T. Higgins probably won you guys your fantasy football championships. If you had T. Higgins and you didn't win, you were probably facing Burrow and probably had somebody else. But definitely a league winner, Mr. T. Higgins there. So I've won my Dynasty League 2 out of the last 4 years now, or only 4 years in the entirety of the league. So happy about that. First one with the name on the trophy twice. I did lose my other championship. I ran into a complete buzzsaw, a team that won the points and the league only lost 1 game, but it happens. So that's okay. And hopefully you guys won your championships too. And I can't overstate how hard it is to win either your championships or your points. Like a lot of things have to go right. You can't have injuries. You can't have CeeDee Lamb sitting at Week 17. Like there's a lot that has to go right. And you can listen to our show. You can listen to other shows. You can do all your rankings. You can do all your preparation. Doesn't matter. A lot has to go right. So hopefully you guys won your championships. Congratulations if you did. And hopefully you keep rocking with us throughout the offseason if you enjoy the offseason content. And if not, you can jump right back in next season when things get rolling for draft prep. So this is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. You can find the show on YouTube, all audio streaming platforms, as well as social media, Twitter, Primetime FF Pod, Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. This is our Friday show. This will be the last Friday-centric show before next fantasy football season. In the offseason, we'll kind of drop shows when it does matter, when it fits our schedule. So it won't be a Thursday, Tuesday/Friday. It'll be, when it fits our schedule. But last Friday show of the season is an all boom and all bust team. That might be a little wonky this week with a lot of players and teams sitting and benching guys, but we still found a way to get you guys some guys we think can help you win your fantasy football leagues if you're crazy that is playing in your league. But if you play daily fantasy, we're going to give you information here that might not strictly work for daily fantasy, but you could still play around with that idea at least. So without further ado, let us get into the all boom and all bust team. So as we say, every single week, the all boom team, normally won't see star players in the all boom team unless we really think they're going to boom. You're not going to see guys like a Jamar Chase. You're not going to see a Saquon Barkley. Those guys shouldn't be on the all boom teams. So Nick, week 18, a lot of guys sitting. I still found a way to really craft an all boom team that I'm pretty happy with. So I'll let you go first here. Who's your all boom quarterback for week 18? I don't know if you would. I didn't have to change any guys on my team.
Me neither.
So that's a first for a while, I think. Hopefully there was no mix-ups by our anonymous GM, but neither of us got priority. We have two teams here. So all boom quarterback. Who do you have?
I'm going with Michael Penix, the guy that I probably, if you asked me before the season, would I ever have this guy on the team? No, because A, pocket passer, B, obviously was going to be the backup all season, but took over, has played 2 games, and even though he hasn't looked great for fantasy, I thought he's looked really, really good on the field from what I've seen. So he has the third most point. They're going up against the Carolina Panthers, who allow the third most points per game to the quarterback position in a win or go home spot. Obviously, they need to hope that Tampa loses to New Orleans, but they still need to win their game. So I think he's going to come out swinging. Again, I think the eye test has looked really good, but he just has not found the end zone. The team has looked very, very good over the last 2 weeks. The offense is scoring a ton of points, but Bijan Robinson has 4 touchdowns in that span. That is a very big outlier compared to the rest of his season. I think Michael Penix finds a way to throw the ball to his guys in Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod, Kyle Pitts. They got tons of weapons over there. I think it's a very big mismatch from the offense and the defense from the skill positions. I think Michael Penix is going to have a good game. I think he finishes in the top 10 for the first time in his NFL career.
You could call this the all incentive or all not incentive teams for me. So I'm going with my guy Geno Smith. My Seahawks, unfortunately, have nothing to play for because they lost to some teams they should not have lost to this season, but now they have nothing to play for. But Geno's going to face the Rams, who allow the 11th most fantasy points, 2 quarterbacks, an average of 17.8 points per game. The Rams are already stated they'll be resting a ton of players. I know Stafford's not playing. I'm not 100% sure, but everybody else on the offense and defense, I'm sure they'll rest a majority of their star players. Even if they get the start, they probably won't finish the game. They'll probably only play a half or something like that. I think like a lot of preseason football here. As for Mike McDonald and the Seahawks, he says there is no resting, guys. They're trying to build a culture. Or trying to finish out the season with 10 wins. So the Seahawks are playing for a win in this one, which I really should be rooting for a loss. Should be, but
honestly,
Geno's facing the Rams. He had 25.1 fantasy points against the Rams in week 9. That was his highest total of this season. And Geno has some incentives to play for. He gets more money. I don't have the numbers here, but he gets more money if he leads the Seahawks to a 10-win season. If he has 185 more passing yards, and if he hits his, I believe it's quarterback QBR or completion percentage actually over 68%, he hits incentives. So I like Geno in this game. They're going to throw the ball a lot. I think they want to see what they have in these receivers. Tyler Lockett on the last year of his deal. DK Metcalf has some trade rumors swirling. JSN's had a great year, so I think the Seahawks will shift a lot in their offense in the offseason. This will be a great spot for the offense. Your first running back.
I'm going to stick with this game, and I'm going to go with Zach Charbonnet. I think he's going to look really, really good. Kenneth Walker now on the IR. He's missing this game for sure. And Charbonnet, he might not have looked great last week, but in his 5 games where he was the starter because Kenneth Walker was out, he's averaging over 20 points per game this season. In week 9, Kenneth Walker in this matchup up against the Rams got 25 rushing attempts. This team is going to want to ground and pound like they did. And with the Rams benching so many of their starters on offense, you got to imagine Seattle will want to run the ball with Charbonnet. I think it's going to be a very good game for your Seattle Seahawks offense, and I think they are going to cook the Rams. I think Charbonnet should easily finish in the top 10 based on the production and the volume that he should see based on the previous games he's had with Walker out.
I'm going to go with Bucky Irving, a guy who had a really good game last week and has really been on fire throughout the second half of the season. He's a guy that I gave you early on in the season to go pick him up on a waiver wire, and if you did, I'm sure it was a great benefit to your fantasy football team. Facing the Saints, who allow the 5th most fantasy points, 2 running backs, an average of 22.9 points per game. Bucky's been great lately. Running back 15 on the season with 18-plus fantasy points in 5 of his last 7 matchups, including last week. He had 18.5 fantasy points against the Saints in week 6. The Bucs also need to win to get into the playoffs. They're a win and in, or a win and Falcons loss in. They're both playing at 1 o'clock, the Falcons and the Bucs, in their respective games. So the Bucs do have a lot to play for here, and the rest of the offense will be on the field for sure. Your second running back, who do you have?
I'm going with Rico Dowdle. He's been a guy that lived on one of these 2 teams all season, but he's on kind of a hot streak. He has 100-plus rushing yards in 4 of his last 5 games. He has 18-plus rushing attempts in 5 of his last 6 games. He has 60% snap share and above in those last 6 games. And the last time he was against Washington, He only scored 16.8. But Zeke got 3 rushing attempts. All 3 came on the goal line in that game, and he could not get it in. For those of you that do not pay attention to the waiver wire, the actual NFL waiver wire this late in the year, Zeke was cut this week. So Rico Dowdle should be seeing all of that goal line work. He should see that 60%. He should see 18 rushing attempts. And when he already is putting up these 100-yard games consistently, I think he breaks that 100 mark, and you hope he finds the end zone and has a really good fantasy day.
I'm going here with the Patriots running backs, and I will hone in on Ramondre Stevenson facing the Bills, who led the third most fantasy points, 2 running backs, and average 23.6. I think Josh Allen will start the game because he has some streak of starting in the NFL, but he won't play the game for long. The Bills have the second seed already locked up. The Bills will end up sitting their guys by halftime. And 2 weeks ago, Stevenson had a pretty good game, 12.3 fantasy points against the Bills. A little concerned that Gibson had the bulk of the carries last week in a not so positive matchup against the Chargers. But with the Bills benching starters and Stevenson and Gibson both getting contracts last offseason, and I think that the Patriots really want to see what they have as they move into the offseason. They will have a top draft pick. They have a lot of money to spend in free agency, so I think they're going to want to see what they have from both backs, and both will have ample opportunities to score in this game. First wide receiver, who do you have?
So my 2 receivers are funny for our longtime listeners. They're a guy that I hated and come to love, and a guy that I love that I've come to hate. But we will start with the guy that I disliked forever and joined an absolute tire fire in the New York Jets, but has been on fire over the later course of the season. It is Davante Adams. Since their bye in, I believe it was week 11, he has been the wide receiver 4 in fantasy football. His games are 18, 26, 43, 20, and 10. He is averaging 11 targets per game in that span. The 26 in that game, the second game of the span, was against Miami, who is really good against wide receivers, but they put Ramsey on Garrett Wilson for the majority of the game, and Davante was able to cook. That was in cold New York. Now we're going to warm Miami. I think it's a much better spot for him, and it sounds like Rodgers and him are auditioning for their next teams. Last week, we thought Rodgers was yet his 500th touchdown to Davante, which when he was a must play, he did not get that touchdown, but he is going to be trying to get that 500th, especially if he does not get that quarterback opportunity, does not chooses to retire. I think that the 2 of them are auditioning for their next place to go, whether that's back to the Raiders, whether that's to the 49ers if they don't want to pay Purdy, wherever that could be. I think this tandem is going to try and stay together, and I think they're going to try to cook together just like they did a few weeks ago in the same matchup.
I'm going to keep it in the Bucks game here. Mike Evans. This is the highest, the incentive that people are looking at the most. So Mike Evans has had 1,000 yards in every single year of his career. Done it 10 times. Looking to do it for the 11th time. He needs 85 yards to do so. He also needs 5 receptions to hit one of his contractual bonuses as well. Baker's going to feed this guy. I'd be very shocked if as long as he's healthy, he plays the entire game, Baker's going to feed this guy. And I could see Baker and Evans playing the entirety of the game until this record is in place. Again, the Bucks and the Falcons will be playing at 1 o'clock. There could be some scoreboard watching in that game, but I think the offense will stay on the field. And as for the Saints, this used to be a nightmare matchup for Evans, but without Marshawn Lattimore, the Saints allow the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 29.8 points per game. If you've had Mike Evans in your lineup the entire season, you're not benching him now, obviously, but this will be a good one. And for you guys that love doing daily fantasy, I'm sure that Evans is going to be a high price bargain. If you gamble, I'm sure his line is going to be right at 80 or 90. I would take it. Last year when he needed to crack that 1,000-yard threshold, he had like 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I would keep Mike Evans locked in everywhere this week.
Love it.
Wide receiver 2, who do you have?
So I said first I started with a guy I hated, and now I come to love. Well, I go to a guy that I have loved for 3 years and has let me down all 3 of them, but he is the wide receiver 15 in the 1 year I did not trust him, and that is Courtland Sutton. He has 8+ targets in all but 1 game since week 8 when Bo Nix really started to cook, and he was going up against Kansas City, who Kansas City is a top 10 team against the wide receiver position. But the last time they faced Courtland Sutton was the wide receiver 6 on the week. In his last 3 games against the Chiefs, he has a touchdown in each and every single one of them. It is win and go home. I like guys that have something to play for this week. And clearly the Broncos have to do that. If they win, they secure a playoff spot. And I know a lot of people want to see him do it. So I think Cortland Sutton will have to be a big piece of that puzzle. I think they're going to have to cook that secondary. And it does sound like the Chiefs are going to be benching a lot of players in this one. So I think Sutton has a very, very high upside in this matchup.
I'm going to go with Jamison Williams facing the Vikings in the biggest game of the week, the only game that truly matters for both teams. The Vikings allow the most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 33.4 points per game. Obviously, both teams will be vying for the 1 seed on Sunday Night Football. This happened like 6 years ago with my Seattle Seahawks and the 49ers. I think the winner would have gotten the 1 seed. The loser got the bye. Seattle lost, and went on to lose to the Packers in the divisional round. But a similar situation here. J-Mo's been great. Wide receiver 13 since week 14, 4 straight weeks with 12 plus fantasy points, 24 plus points in each of his last 2 games, including a tough matchup against the 49ers last week on Monday night. And like I said, Lions need to win to get the 1 seed. It'll be all systems go for that offense. And I see no reason why J-Mo does not have a big game for you guys. Tight end, who do you have?
I'm going Noah Gray. I think Travis Kelce is clearly going to be one of the starters as a bench in this one. And we are going to get the Carson Wentz show. He is going to try and show off for teams and try and be next year's Sam Darnold story, frankly. A guy that went to a great coach, a great system, learned how to be a backup, and can take over that role. I think this is his opportunity to show that off. But here's the real reason why I love him. Carson Wentz in each of the 2016, 17, 18, and 19 seasons, his leading receiver each and every single year was Zach Ertz, who was the tight end 6, 3, 2, and 4 on the year each of those seasons. He led the team in targets in 3 of those and led them in yards for all 4 of them. There is no Travis Kelce. It is going to have to be Noah Gray's show. We've seen him have very good games this year. He's been inconsistent, but obviously as a backup tight end, you were never going to trust him this year. And he did get paid in the offseason. Do not forget they paid him a year early before that contract year. We can't get Jamar Chase paid, but we could get guys like Noah Gray that contract a little bit early. I think it's a very good spot for him to be maybe even the tight end 1 on the week. I imagine this has to be the marquee DFS play.
And shout out to Travis Kelce, who did come through for all of us in our fantasy football championships. I have Zach Ertz here, another incentive play. So its incentives are 70 plus receptions. He needs 9 more, 700 receiving yards. He needs 90. Probably won't get that one. And 8 touchdowns. He needs 2. So I think Jaden Daniels will feed him the ball a little bit. Terry McLaurin also has some incentives as well. So he's a great play. And the Commanders have something to play for here. Again, playing at 1 o'clock, going up with the Packers. If the Commanders win, they get the 6th seed. And they would end up playing either the Rams or the Bucks, depending on the seeding there. If they lose, they'd end up playing Philly, I believe. They did beat Philly, but without Jalen Hurts. They lost to Philly with Hurts. Hurts will be back for the playoffs. So, I think Hurts is a good play. He's been reliable throughout most of the season. I think he's a good play this week. Flex play.
I'm going with Michael Carter, former New York Jets running back, now the Arizona Cardinals running back. This probably should have been the number 1 waiver wire target on the week, and I think he's a very solid play. Last week, James Conner left early. Michael Carter saw 72% of the snap share in the game. He had a couple catches and 13 carries, but in the last 2 games where Conner exited both with injury, he had 7 catches in those games. That is a very good target number for a running back. San Francisco allows top 5 points per game to the running back position. I thought he was very solid as a Jet. I think he's going to be very solid in this spot right here. He is a pass-catching back. We know James Conner caught a bunch of those checkdowns. I think Carter's going to be able to catch a few, and he was very efficient as a runner last week. So I see no reason why the 49ers are going to be able to stop him when they were not able to stop pretty much any running back this season. I think it's going to be a very solid game. I'm going to guess he gets over 15 points, which for a guy you picked up this late in the year in week 18, I think that's good enough to be a boom.
I'm going with Jordan Addison, keeping it in the Sunday night game. Addison's facing the Lions, who allow the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 31 points per game. He's your wide receiver 9 since week 14, 13 plus in all 4 games. Again, fighting for the 1 seed. Both these teams, I think they're going to air it out. And as for Addison, he needs 33 yards to crack 1,000 on the season, I believe. So I would keep it locked in that game. Going now to the all bust teams. Anybody can be busted. Any star. We've done it throughout the season. Anybody's viable for this one. So, Nick, who's your all-bust quarterback for Week 18?
I'm going with Jordan Love, a guy that was my guy for all of last year's playoffs. And, I'm not going to lie, he beat me in a championship last year. But I am going to bet against him this week. He's going up against the Chicago Bears, who are a top 3 team against the quarterback position. who was coming off extended rest. They played on Thursday Night Football last week. Love has only scored more than 20 points once since week 6. That's pretty bad and not good enough to be a boom guy or a consistent guy you trust at the quarterback spot. There's enough guys that you can pick up off waivers that consistently do that. Last time they faced, he actually had a very solid fantasy day, but the Packers only threw 17 times in the game, and he had his only rushing touchdown of the year. That feels like a big outlier in terms of the rushing touchdown, obviously, with it being the only one. And if you're going to get 17 pass attempts, it'll probably be up from that, but I don't think it's going to be overly efficient. I think those two, if you go back to the mean and what the mean has been for him, it should be a pretty rough fantasy day. I think he's going to get in between 10 and 14 points, which is not good enough to start at the quarterback spot, in my opinion.
I do want to state here, it's actually Jamison Williams who needs 33 yards to crack 1,000, not Jordan Addison. Got my receivers mixed up, but still both plays for me. Nick, I couldn't get through our last show without talking about a Jet. So we're going to talk about a Jet here on Mr. Aaron Rodgers facing the Dolphins, who allow the least amount of fantasy points, 2 quarterbacks, an average of 13.7 per game. He had under 15 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks, including last week against the Bills was horrendous. The Jets may be dead. They don't want to play. None of these guys want to play. The defense doesn't want to play. The offense doesn't want to play. I'm sure there's a lot of friction in that locker room. And Rodgers might want to play for Devontae Adams, but that's it. Even though he said this is the best 2 years of his life, not, when he was winning Green Bay, won Super Bowl, MVPs. No, these are the best 2 years of his life, apparently. Maybe that's due to the election results. I don't know. But on top of all that, Miami has something to play for here. The Jets don't. Miami needs to win to keep their playoff chances alive. They're competing with both the Bengals and the Broncos. The Broncos are probably a win in against the Chiefs on Sunday, but the Dolphins have to win just in case that would secure their spot. So, I would want to play many other quarterbacks over Aaron Rodgers this week. I see no reason when you look at those last 2 weeks that they can be trusted. I just think they're out of it. They don't care. That's the bottom line. There are bad teams that I think do care, and I don't think they care. I don't think there's many guys on that roster that care about that organization or care to win this game. They might care about their stats for next season, but they don't care to win.
I hate to say that's probably fair, but I will say Mr. Aaron Rodgers did throw for 300 yards against the Miami Dolphins. One of the two times
he did. He did have 17 fantasy points, but what I've seen the last 2 weeks, that locker room
I respect the take. I respect it.
Must be bad. There are bad teams that I think will look good on Sunday, like the Patriots. They have stuff to play for. I think there's a lot of bad teams that do have a lot to play for in terms of next season and build. The Bears should look good, I hope, for their sake. But the Bears seem to have chemistry to where they just hate their coaches and GM, but they like each other and know what they have in the locker room. The Jets, they have so much talent in the locker room. Maybe it's an ego-driven thing. I don't know. But anyway.
And we're out here interviewing Ron Rivera. Anyway, let's take it over. I'm going to stick with this game. I'm going with Devon Achane, a guy that I never would put on the all-bus team and have not for 17 weeks, a guy that I never thought should be here in his 2 years of his career. But it's Snoop Huntley starting, and I'm not a big fan of that for Devon Achane. Tua has been his best friend for fantasy. Achane has played 4 games this season without Tua. His finishes RB 33, 44, 52, and 35. He's not finished in the top 30 with Tua this season. He has absolutely stunk. And week 14, when he went up against the New York Jets, 14 carries for 24 yards. Very inefficient. He did score a touchdown, and he got 6 catches in the game, but Snoop is not going to target him this entire season. In those 4 games, he only has 3 catches in a singular game without Tua. It is a horrible spot for him and a horrible matchup to a Jets team that is top 5 against the running back position. I do not like the spot for Achane. I actually do think you could bench him, even though he is clearly a superstar. He has not also broken double-digit points without Tua as well.
When we do our off-season content, kind of do our biggest takeaways from the season, I think one of the biggest takeaways we'll both have is the Dolphins players with and without Tua, improving how valuable Tua is to that team. The Dolphins are a team that need to invest in the backup quarterback for sure.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
When Tua's on the field, Tyreek and Waddle are top 15 receivers. Achane, the running back 1. Jonnu was great. But when Tua's off the field, they all get a major downgrade.
Incredibly bad.
Not a slight downgrade, it's a major downgrade.
Mm-hmm.
My first running back bust here is going to be Aaron Jones. This is a temper expectations one for me. I know the Vikings, I've stated that it's probably the highest over-under of the week. I haven't looked at the over-unders. It was probably the highest of the week. Vikings need to win the game, and he did have a good game against the Lions. I think it was week 8. However, Lions are still really tough against running backs. Allowed the 50 was points, an average of 17 points per game. And Jones has under 13 fantasy points in each of his last 2 games. He's been splitting carries with Cam Akers. I picked up Cam Akers in my Dynasty League before the week ended, just in case he signs with another team in the offseason. I made a couple dart throws on my Dynasty team. But they seem to like Akers, and they seem to like splitting the carries, even though Aaron Jones is signed to a contract. So I could see that also being a problem for Akers. Your second running back.
If you did see my facial reaction, it's because I was looking up the over-unders for you. This game, the over-under is 56.5. Wow. That's crazy. I mean, it makes sense because these two offenses have been so explosive, and the Lions have literally been the race to 40 all season long.
Yep.
But still crazy, the line. Anyways. All right, I am going with Tyrone Tracy, another guy that I have loved this year. I put a lot of my guys, honestly, on the bus team this week. It was kind of crazy for me. But going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, I know they're benching some starters, but I do not think that the Giants' offense is good. I think last week was clearly an outlier with Drew Lock having the game of his life. I actually wanted to put Drew Lock on the all-bus team, but I couldn't justify putting Drew Lock there. Didn't feel right to the viewers at home to say don't pick up Drew Lock off the waivers. But anyways, in the game that he played against the Eagles earlier this year, 6 carries on 67% of the snap share. They could not get the ball moving. They tried it with Singletary. They tried it with Tyrone Tracy, and it just did not work. So they pivoted immediately to the passing game when they fell behind very quickly. I don't think he catches enough balls in this game. Drew Lock has not targeted the running back that much. I don't think it's going to be a very good spot for Tracy to be a PPR back. I don't think the touchdown upside is good against the Eagles, even if they are benching some of their starters. I do think you still play him because it is very thin at the position, especially now with some of the injuries that are piling up and the benching of some stars. But I just don't think that he's going to have good enough of a fantasy day. Where if you do have a pivot like a Michael Carter, I would much rather play him or Zach Charbonnet, who you might have gotten lucky to get off the waivers the last few weeks.
I'm going to go with Amir Abdullah for the simple and just point of the Chargers love the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs, an average of 17.3 per game. They stuffed up the Patriots backs last week, and the Chargers have something to play for. I believe they have seeding with the Steelers, but I guess the Steelers play on Saturday night. I think the Chargers need to win and Steelers need to lose for the Chargers to get a higher seed where they would play.
They play the Texans. They get to the 5 Texans,
and the Bengals have a lot to play for. So the Bengals need to beat the Steelers. So I'm looking into the future where the Bengals beat the Steelers on Saturday and the Chargers need to win to get that higher seed and to avoid the Harbaugh Bowl, which I would personally want to do. I think they'll stuff up Abdullah and whatever other back they want to use in that committee situation. So that's why I would avoid Abdullah.
Yeah.
Wide receiver 1, who do you have?
I'm going with Calvin Ridley. Again, another guy that was one of my guys before the year. Halfway through the season, I said I thought he'd be great on the half-half, and he's been solid. He just hasn't been great. He has not broken 17 points since week 10, which sounds like a lot, but for a guy that has been super explosive, boom bust in his career, that really feels like a number he should have broken. But here's the biggest outlier for me and the biggest concern. In his games with Mason Rudolph this year, he has not exceeded 6 targets in any single one of those games. So where Will Levis was throwing him 8, 9, 10 balls in a game, whether they were accurate or not, Mason Rudolph is not throwing him the ball often, and he's not an accurate quarterback. So that has not been very good for him. He's more accurate than Levis, obviously, but still not great. I think this team has clearly transitioned to run first. We've seen Tajay Spears be very good for fantasy. We've seen Tony Pollard be very solid for fantasy. I do not think that Calvin Ridley is reliable enough with his quarterback option and with the running game that they have presented over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
One of my favorite takes that I butted headed with Nick this year over is the Packers offense. And I've stuck to my guns that they are an inconsistent offense in terms of not knowing who's going to get the ball. And I'm sticking with that with Jaden Reed here, facing the Bears, who allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of 24.2 per game. Jaden Reed is under 12 fantasy points in 2 of his last 4 weeks, with those 2 games being under 2 fantasy points. That's the model of inconsistency when it comes to this Packers offense, in my opinion, at least. on top of that, he only had 9.8 week 11 against Chicago. I think the Bears have a lot to play for in terms of the talent on that team, and I think they'll try to win this game. So, I would keep Jaden Reed on the bench this week.
Yeah.
Your second wide receiver.
I'm going with Giacobbe Myers. He faced the Chargers in week 1 and he had 3 targets. That was the lowest in any game. Obviously, things change over 3-4 months of football. But I don't think the Raiders are going to be very good. I don't think they're going to be able to move the ball against this defense. To Nick's point, I think that the Chargers are going to push to win the game. I think the Steelers lose on Saturday, and they are going to do everything they can to absolutely mollywop the Raiders. And this is going to be a big struggle for Giacobbe Myers and Aiden O'Connell.
I'm going to go with Keenan Allen and stick in this game. Facing the Packers, who allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 24.8 per game. I know that Jair Alexander's out for the season, which is big for the Packers in the playoffs, but they still have a really good defense, a lot of sacks. They shut out the Saints 2 weeks ago, only shut out of the season. Keenan has under 10 fantasy points in 2 of his last 4 games. And I think that the Bears, if I'm the Bears, I would probably tell Caleb, hey, man, maybe throw to your 2 younger wide receivers a bit more, try to carry that over into next season. I'm not sure if Keenan Allen will be a Bear next season. The way that the Bears are orchestrated is hilarious because they're a team that will play in the snow and in the cold in late in the season every single year due to their geographical location, and they've just loaded up on receivers. It's actually hilarious how they've orchestrated this team. But I would keep Keenan on the bench this week if you can.
Huh?
Tight end, who do you have?
I'm going with Mike Gesicki. Now, I will say this. I will retract this statement if T. Higgins is playing, or if T. Higgins is not playing, I should say. But if T is in, I do not want Mike Gesicki. He is cooked this season, but it's mostly been when T. Higgins has been out. He only one time this season has had back-to-back double-digit games, and they were games that T. Higgins missed back-to-back. Pittsburgh earlier this year, 10.3 points. Not horrible for the tight end position, but it's really not that great. Gesicki also has a horrible snap share. He only has 60% snap share in 2 games this year, which I thought was very surprising, and only 50% or above in 5 of these games. I don't think he's missed a game all year. If T is out, again, I think I would actually put him on the all-boom team because I like the opportunity against Pittsburgh with him being the second best pass catching option, but we would just watch T go for 40. We watched Jamar Chase go for 40. It feels like every other week. I do not think that Gesicki is going to have a great
He's still
day.
involved last week. He got a couple targets last week. I saw him catching.
Yeah, exactly. So he had a good game last week, but that's to my point where I don't think he goes back to back and has double digits because he's only done it once and it was without T. Higgins. So it's kind of been like the game plan was for Gesicki and then they retract it. It's like they make the defense on the other team have to prepare for him.
And stat sheet stuffer of the year, Joe Burrow is going for his 9th consecutive week, 250 passing yards and 2+ touchdowns. Only player in NFL history that would do that.
Yep.
Shout out Joey. That's me and Nick just joking around right there. But Joe's been great this season, and it's a shame they don't have like 2 or 3 more wins because he should be the MVP with his ridiculous stat
what I
line.
said about Herbert for 4 years, but we'll retract that. That's fine.
Oh no, this is different. All right, my tight end is a temper expectations one. This is TJ Hawkinson. The Lions allow the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends. An average of 7. There's just a lot of pass catchers on the team that will get a lot of love. It's crazy. I have 2 Vikings on the all bust team, more like temper expectations for that game. He also under double digits in 5 of the 9 games he's played this season. I think he'll need a touchdown to get over double digits, which he could if the over hits, but I don't think it's a guaranteed workload like Jefferson and Addison. They will have monster games this week.
Yeah.
Your last flex play, who do you have?
I'm going with Marvin Harrison Jr. The 49ers have crushed the wide receiver position this year. For as bad as they've been against running back, they've been great against receivers. They're top 5 against it. In week 5, Marvin Harrison had 7 targets and only 2 catches in that game up against the 49ers. You might be thinking with more time, with more chemistry, with Kyler, the targets go up, and they have, but you'd also think the catches go with it. It really has not been good. Marvin Harrison, since week 11, has the 10th easiest schedule against wide receivers. He has 50 targets in that span and only 24 catches. That is an average of a little bit over 4 or around 4 catches per game. That is not good enough for fantasy football, and that is not good enough unless you get in the end zone. But the 49ers are one of the best teams against the wide receiver position. I think Kyler's been historically bad. I actually saw a report that the Cardinals would consider moving him if they can get up in the draft. So we will see if he gets on the move. Maybe get a little Kingsbury redemption, but let's just not see him in a Jets uniform, please.
I'm going with every pass catcher for the Cowboys here. The Commanders allowed the 11th fewest fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of 26.2. That number's gone up and up and up since trading for Marshawn Lattimore. And you just can't trust this offense without CeeDee Lamb. They only scored 7 fantasy points total last week against the Eagles. They just couldn't move the ball. They're just not an offense that I would like to target this week if you do have a championship on the line. And Nick, I do want to let you know that your guy Justin Herbert is actually a better stat sheet stuffer than Joe Burrow in a sense. 2021 season, 5,014 yards for Herbert, 38 touchdowns to 15 interceptions, and 97.7 passer rating. Joey B this season, 4,600 yards, so a little bit less yards, but more touchdowns at 42. Less interceptions at 8 with a passer rating of 109.8. So I give your guy Justin Herbert the stat sheet stuffer award, and I give my guy Joe Burrow the very bad defense that's messed up his MVP season award.
Which season was it where he had the 5,000 yards?
2021.
Was that when it was a 16 game season as well? I believe it was.
Maybe. So
he did play 17 games. That was the first 17. All right. So he's got 1 game to catch up to him with 500 yards, which is actually.
Well, he's already beat him in touchdowns and interceptions, unless Joey B throws 7 interceptions.
Yeah.
I would love, and we're not going to do it now. I would love to look at the defensive statistics, and I would also like to look at, if the numbers are out there, I'm sure there are, number of points trailed by during the season, and how long they trailed for in each game. Was one of my big knocks on Matt Stafford throughout his career has been he racked up a lot of his yards that will get him in the Hall of Fame within the fourth quarter when they were down 20 points. I know Herbert was not down 20 points like Stafford was, but at least when I'm watching the Bengals this season, it feels like they're normally down like 7 or 14.
I don't remember the exact stat, so I apologize if I misquote it, but I do remember it was either last year or 2 years ago. The Chargers were the only team in the NFL to lose a game where they scored over 30 points, and they scored 8 games over 30 or something ridiculous like
that.
It was ludicrous.
It was something like that, and now the Bengals have somehow lopsided that stat. I think the Bengals this season are the only team in NFL history to lose X amount of games by X amount of points or something like that.
Yeah.
My last note on this, in Joey B's 3 healthy seasons where he played an entire season, 34 touchdowns in all 3 of them. Herbert's only cracked over 30 twice and hasn't since 2022. So maybe he needs, his yards are great. His yards are over 4,000, 3 out of 5. And this year they ran the ball a lot this year. It's okay. But
if you remember though, also the last 2 years, 2 years ago and 3 years ago, Austin Eckler did have like 45 rushing touchdowns.
He did have a lot of touchdowns. He did.
He did have that crazy streak.
He did.
Anyways,
it's always a fun little debate when it comes to that. I do like my guy Joey B, and I feel bad that he is not going to get an MVP and he's not going to get a Super Bowl because
got the Pro Bowl.
Yay, the Pro Bowl!
Hey, even Patrick Mahomes didn't get it. Snoop Huntley's got one. Mac Jones has got one. But
we
didn't get one.
Well, the thing is, those Pro Bowls don't count because they were alternates and whatever. Those things don't count. Like Derek Carr and Eli Manning were Pro Bowlers one year when they were really bad. An interesting debate we did have in one of my group chats the other day. We were ranking quarterbacks on the year, and some of us either forgot Mahomes, just didn't put him. He wasn't cracking our top 7 this year. In terms of this year,
that's probably fair statistically, but it's crazy. The only way that Patrick Mahomes makes the Pro Bowl this year is as a replacement, which would mean he would have to lose to essentially one of those 3 quarterbacks. But if
they're
Patrick
Mahomes, the Pro Bowl, what are they even doing? Is it a skills competition? I forget what they're even doing.
Who cares? But if Patrick Mahomes doesn't go all the way, you got to imagine Burrow, Lamar, or what's his face, Lamar. One of those 3 is going to pull out because that's usually what happens, and the next guy up is going to be Bo Nix. Because that's what the next on the ballot is. It goes Patrick Mahomes and then Bo Nix, surprisingly. So
yeah,
Pro Bowl Bo Nix.
Yep. Alrighty, guys. So that is our final show heading into Week 18. I should have mentioned this at the top of the show, but I'll mention it now. We are going to go live this Sunday. Special start time instead of 8:30. We're sleeping in. We're going to 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. And it's going to be a little bit different. Me and Nick are going to run our draft lottery. So I'm the commissioner of our league, and I'm going to run the lottery. We're going to run it live. And while I'm doing the lottery, so you get 6 draft picks. So while I'm doing the lottery, we'll answer your fantasy football questions. We don't anticipate a lot of questions coming in since it's week 18, and hopefully you crazies aren't playing in a championship. But if you are, we'll answer your questions as we're running the lottery. And feel free to come chat with us. Talk about your season, our season, playoff fantasy, whatever you want to talk about, we'll talk about as we're running the lottery for about 30 minutes. 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. If you enjoy the show and you're watching on YouTube, please drop a like on this video. We'd appreciate that. And subscribe to the channel, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast, for the off-season content. Plus, the content will ramp up, obviously, when the season gets going in a short 8 months from now. Football season on the way. Social media, Twitter, Primetime FF Pod, Facebook, Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you guys for checking in with us this season and supporting us. And we'll talk to you guys on Sunday.